Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Max with BuzzTox here, and I'm back with a brand new Westworld video, where I'm going to dive into who is Charlotte Hale. Last season, we saw Bernard kill Dolores because he thought she was a threat to the humans. But then after reaching the center of his maze, consciousness, he decided that the hosts need Dolores in order to survive. So Bernard recreated Charlotte Hale, and took Dolores' brain module and put it inside. And that resulted in Dolores killing Bernard in order to help him escape, and it led to her carrying out 5 host brain modules out of the park. And first, before we dissect who Charlotte is, we need to first understand how Dolores could have gotten these 5 brain modules in the first place. For one, she could have gotten them off of the dead hosts during the fight for the Valley Beyond. That could include Lawrence, who died from park rangers. It could also be Clementine, who was left dead on the road, even though her module was corrupted. Secondly, she could have got some of these modules during her own mission to the Cradle, then to the Forge, and then escaping the park. We know she had her father Abernathy's encryption key. He had 35 years of park data, and it was used as the passcode to unlock the Forge. We can assume that after Dolores killed Bernard, she held on to her father's brain module. She also killed Bernard and took his brain module. But the third thing she did, we learn in this season. When Bernard tries to relive his reveries to understand what happened, we see a Charlotte Hale printing brain modules, which means that Dolores didn't just scavenge for brain modules, she purposely created hosts that she wanted to take with her. And in this clip, we see that she made 2. Another thing I want to add in this scene, there is also a skeleton. That skeleton could be just for set design, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Dolores created another host and left them at Westworld to watch it over. But regardless, based on Dolores' actions, there's a couple of things that we can rule out. For one, we can assume if she's going to print something, she would need a copy of that individual's code. And she had Angela destroy the Cradle, because she saw the Cradle as their chains. It ties them to the storylines that they were given by humans. So because the Cradle's destroyed, we can assume that if Dolores is reprinting someone, she's going off the data of the encryption key of Abernathy. Another thing I want to point out is that these modules will be needed to be put in host bodies. I think it's safe to say that these are not human host modules. This isn't a Fidelity or Door-like situation. And what this eliminates is Caleb is not Charlotte, for a couple of reasons. For one, the host modules are not red. Those symbolize Fidelity human tested hosts. Second of all, we know that Delos has been able to create human consciousness, but they can't print it into a true flesh body. I think that's reserved for another character, William. And thirdly, the timeline just doesn't add up. We've seen Dolores help and deal with Charlotte, and in the same scene, look into what Caleb's doing. And to assume Dolores has the resources at Arnold's old house to recreate Caleb, I think is a little bit far-fetched. However, what I will say is I think Caleb is a very special character who has a very deep backstory. So while I think Caleb has a very deep story, which I'll dive into in another video, I do not think that he is Charlotte. But another thing we need to know and pinpoint before we understand who Charlotte is we need to look at her actions and her character. But the main thing that we're seeing is this Charlotte host is battling between who she is and who the real Charlotte Hale was. She goes back and forth between empathetic and a predator. She ends up cutting herself because the old Charlotte wants to almost rip her out of her body. And Dolores self-diagnoses her as taking a liking to Charlotte and identifying with her more. And we see that connection escalate throughout this episode. She goes from very stone cold with her son Nathan to crying, watching Charlotte say goodbye to Nathan. She even ends up becoming protective over Nathan, saving him from a pedophile and ending up killing him. And here she ends up thanking the pedophile because he allowed her to see the truth, that he reminded her of something. And she says because of that pedophile, she remembered what it's like to be her. And the hardest part to dissect is who is she? And who is she identifying as? Because she says she's a predator and chokes out some guy at a park, but then she ends up crying watching Charlotte. So to be honest, we don't know enough information to know who is the empathetic Charlotte and who is the predator Charlotte. Because the real Charlotte Hale was not a great person. She did whatever was necessary to survive, including killing Elsie. So I think as time goes on, we'll find out more which identity is more of the host. But I think from Dolores' point of view, it makes sense to print someone who is more of a predator. And if in this scene, when Charlotte talks about remembering who she was, it would make sense if she remembered the flaws and the horribleness of humanity. Because Dolores is making her kill Sarek and do these jobs that are very, very difficult. So you don't want to put somebody in that position who is empathetic. Because I believe she already did that with Bernard. She allowed Bernard to be naturally empathetic and allowed him to be alive. So I think Charlotte is something much, much different. But another thing we see between Charlotte and Dolores is their relationship. We learn that Dolores has a very distinct role imagined for Charlotte. And on top of that, Dolores has a very deep trust of Charlotte. Dolores even tells her that no one knows you like I do, and no one knows me like you do. So these characters have a very deep connection, which really narrows down the possibilities because Dolores doesn't have a deep connection with many people. And a lot of the people she had a deep connection with didn't make it. And one more thing we need to look at is this Charlotte Hale has memories of things that have happened in the past. When she finds out she has to play a character named Charlotte Hale, she knows that Charlotte wanted them all dead. And then when she sees Bernard's brain module, she knows that he tried to stop them. So this character has a very unique perspective that not a lot of characters on this show have. So, let's look at who it is. This Charlotte needs to have a deep connection and trust with Dolores. They need to have memories and an understanding of what's happened in the past. And they need to have a key personality trait that Dolores desires to achieve her outcome or her goal. So for one, as I said before, it is not Caleb. Caleb is meant for something bigger. I think he relates more to the door. And I think he's also a similarity and a different perspective showing the human side of the host story. Charlotte Hale must be a host, a true host. And we know it's not Bernard because Bernard is already accounted for. When Charlotte sees Bernard's brain module, she knows who Bernard is and identifies him as a different individual. So we know it is not another copy of Bernard. There's Lawrence. I always thought we'd see Lawrence come back. He got killed in Westworld and he could be retrieved by Dolores. He has a lot of value because him and Dolores share a long history, as well as Lawrence has a big long history with William or the Man in Black. He knows William more than most people. He could be useful for fidelity or to use against William. But I do not think that he is Charlotte because there's no deep trust or connection between Lawrence and Dolores. And Lawrence wouldn't even know the information of Charlotte wanting to kill them all, or Bernard wanting to stop them. I think Lawrence might be somebody like Martin Connells, and we'll discover that later in the show. Then there's Clementine, and Clementine could be strategically used against Maeve. Dolores clearly has a plan, and she is using hosts as chess pieces. She knows that they all have a unique role to play. Much like how Lawrence is for William, the Man in Black, Clementine is for Maeve. But Charlotte wouldn't be Clementine, because Dolores would not trust Clementine in a critical role, and she doesn't have that level of trust in her. And then there's Teddy, and we can be pretty sure that it's not Teddy because Dolores left him in the Valley Beyond. He killed himself because he refused to follow in Dolores' footsteps, but his core drive was to always protect her. So Dolores wouldn't bring Teddy even if she wanted to because he would be a liability. We have Angela, but she died in the Forge, and she was just a foot soldier, so she wouldn't be any use to Dolores. And I don't think Dolores could reprint Maeve either, because Maeve achieved abilities and consciousness herself. And that consciousness manifests itself as corrupt or scrambled code. Dolores wouldn't have the resources to reprint Maeve even if she wanted to. But that takes us to the two most plausible people. The first is Abernathy. Him and Dolores have shared a very close connection for a long time. He played the role of her father. Last time we saw Abernathy, his module was used as an encryption key. Also, it stored 35 years of park data. He was sought after by Charlotte because he was a very valuable asset, and his personality was a mess. He was given a fake storyline by Sizemore to try and smuggle him out of the park, and he jumped between his storylines. He'd snap to become Abernathy, Dolores' dad, and then he would snap to another storyline where he was a Shakespearean cannibal. And it works to be Abernathy for a couple reasons. First is his relationship with Dolores. They have a very close relationship, and Dolores knows him very well. She can trust him because a part of his core code is Dolores, even though it might be buried between different characters and storylines. Number 2 is the value of what he is, all the data he holds, and all the information he can access. And number 3, he shares the personality to this Charlotte character in almost a mirroring way. Charlotte battles between being empathetic and clinging on to the real Charlotte Hale's life, and being a predator, an angry tyrant who understands the flaws of humanity. And Abernathy struggled with the same thing. He's the father of Dolores. But he also snapped and told Ford that he would have vengeance on him, that he would take his cold mechanical hand and kill him. So Abernathy also has the duality that we've seen from Charlotte. And finally, Abernathy shares the connections that Charlotte has stated. Abernathy knows that Charlotte tried to kill them. He was right in the middle of it, and he is aware that Bernard tried to end them. So Abernathy seems like the perfect fit, but there is one more potential host, and that is either Dolores or Wyatt. It is the 2 cornerstone personalities that Dolores has been given. Now, one thing I will say is, I do not think that Dolores is Wyatt and Charlotte is Dolores. I don't think Dolores split her personality, because she is a conscious being. She may act like Wyatt, but no matter what, she is a conscious, living Dolores. She can't just split her personality. She is both Dolores and Wyatt, as well as the person that she's going to become. But I think Dolores could have accessed parts of herself, or she could have accessed Abernathy's encryption key to get data from the park, to use her old personality as Dolores or her old personality as Wyatt, and implemented that in Charlotte. It's just deciding who it is. Is it Dolores or is it Wyatt? I would go out on a limb and to say I do not think it's Dolores, because Dolores' true nature was to see the beauty in this world, the possibilities. She was very empathetic and understanding. She didn't really have a predator inside, like what we're seeing with Charlotte. Another thing is we see Charlotte getting all these messages, these voicemails, and they seem like they're all encrypted. And every time she plays, just a single note plays out. And I think this is her code not allowing her to hear these messages. If you look at the messages, they have different sound waves. I think this is actually an individual talking. So whether this character is Abernathy or Charlotte, they're not able to hear what this voicemail is saying. They may have intuitions, but all they're hearing is a plain static noise. And I think that's because they're not allowed to hear it. Much like when Bernard didn't see the door, or when he was given the plans of him as a host. He always says it doesn't look like anything to me, because they're programmed not to experience things that pull them out of their own artificial reality. And also, much like Bernard, Charlotte seems to be merging inside of the host Charlotte Hale. Bernard is not just a host, and he is not a complete fidelity copy of Arnold. He's a mix of them combined. And I think the same will go for this Charlotte Hale. Whether it's Wyatt or Abernathy, we see her losing her mind and seemingly losing herself to the real Charlotte Hale and her life. Much like Bernard is an individual, but he also has memories of Arnold. And it would make perfect sense for Abernathy to have these memories of Charlotte because he has 35 years of guest park data. That includes Charlotte's information as a guest. But one thing I will point out is any time Charlotte Hale listens to a voicemail, she instantly remembers or accesses something from Charlotte's past. She saw the voicemail and then noticed her apartment and then knew Jake, her ex-husband, and her son Nathan. She listened to another voicemail and saw Nathan with the pedophile, and her motherly instincts kicked in. So all in all, the most likely is either Abernathy or Wyatt. But I think the best case scenario, if I were to wager a guess, is Abernathy, because he has the memories of Charlotte and Bernard that we've seen this Charlotte talk about, whereas Wyatt is just an old fabricated storyline. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, let me know who you think Charlotte Hale is and why. I'm also going to be coming out with a Caleb video later, so stay tuned. But until next time, see you guys later.